Welcome back to Rowing on the Square, the podcast. Getting back in the boat after a back injury, it sounds simple. Rest, rehab, get cleared, and row. But the gap between being cleared and actually performing is where most rowers get stuck, and today's guest knows that gap well. Lauren Miller started rowing as a walk-on at the University of Minnesota. She was a swimmer and a triathlete, and in a few months as a novice, she fell in love with the sport. She finished her college career in 2018 with a B.S. in Neuroscience, then moved to Saratoga Springs to train with ARION, the advanced rowing initiative of the Northeast, chasing the elite level rowing dream. After a year, she stepped away from full-time training and took a role back at Minnesota as a graduate assistant coach. She earned her master's in business administration, but high-level training pulled her back. She returned to ARION, and within months, she earned a spot racing with the Pan American team in 2023. Then came the setback, a back injury that took her out of training and into a long rehab process starting in 2024 until now. This conversation is about what it actually takes to come back, not just to row again, but to row at an elite performance level. The decisions, the setbacks, the rebuild. If you're working your way back from a back injury, this conversation is for you. Please welcome Lauren to the Rowing on the Square podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and chatting with me today. And just for everybody on the podcast who doesn't know you, can you give me a little bit of your rowing background and tell me your rowing story, and then we'll get into the injury and how that went.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so my name's Lauren. I've been rowing now, when did I start rowing? Been rowing now for about 13 years, if you count it since when I've started, so a while. I was a walk-on to the University of Minnesota. So I was a swimmer in high school. I did triathlon. I did track. I loved to bike, but didn't really know rowing was a sport. Found it by accident. I had a friend at the time who was getting recruited to the Minnesota team and was like, hey, you're tall. You should try this. And I was like, sure. Learned to row in college. Went through the University of Minnesota system. Really fell in love with the sport. Really ended up loving it. And I actually have a weird elite rowing journey. So I went to ARION, the high performance team here, immediately post graduation. I had done a couple of different identification camps in college and did the national team selection camp. Didn't make it, was cut, but got some exposure that way and wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do career wise, but knew that I still loved rowing and wanted to give it a shot. So ended up for about a year training with ARION and ultimately made the decision to go back to Minnesota to go to graduate school. Thought I was done rowing, still loved the sport, but just was like, I would need to go get a master's degree, get my MBA. And I actually coached the team there as the GA for 3 years. So had a great experience there coaching, stayed close with the sport. And during the end of that time, when my time as GA and subsequently my degree was up, I ended up just staying in shape. I was still working out quite a bit, but not rowing training. And I gave my coach, Kat, a call and I was like, hey, I did really well on PR on my 6K somehow after not for 3 years. I just miss rowing. Would love to give this a try again. And all that to say, I've been back at ARION here now for about 2.5 or 3 years now and have since had a really great kind of just journey through elite training, despite the injury that we'll talk about. But yeah, so now I'm out here in New York and I work remotely for a big med device company while training with ARION. So a weird, windy path, but we're still here.
That's amazing. So you and Sav train together, correct?
We do, yes.
Oh, that's so cool. Because I know Sav talked about her rib injury on the podcast, a couple podcasts ago. So take a look in the show notes and I'll connect her podcast too if you want to learn more about what the ARION athletes are doing. But tell us a little bit about the buildup and when the injury happened and what were your first signs and things that things weren't 100%.
Yeah, so let's see. So my injury was a back injury. It started as a bulging disc and turned into a really pretty nasty herniation after about 1.5 years. And so when I came back to ARION in 2023, as I mentioned, I wasn't training for rowing for about 3 years. I hit the ground running and had a really good several months. I got to compete with Pan American Games team. We did very well there, which was super exciting. But during training for that, I had noticed some pretty severe tightness in my hips and low back, more than the normal tightness that I feel like you deal with as a rower. And I was managing it with PT, managing it the best I could, but ultimately ended up getting some imaging because it had progressed to be pretty debilitating during practice. That I had a bulging disc in my low back and L4, L5. And so at that point, surgery wasn't the treatment path because it wasn't severe enough at that point.
Yeah.
But as we continued to manage it, really over the course of, I would say, probably a year, we're trying to manage it with PT and just saying going in and out of training, supplementing with the bike, as everyone's familiar with. It just continued to degrade and get worse to the point where I was missing several competitions, missing a lot of rowing motion practice, like the erg and the water, and was spending a lot of time on the bike. And finally, let's see, it would have been the fall of 2024. It was getting really bad to the point where I couldn't really stand upright very easily at all. And so I got some imaging done, and that bulging disc had subsequently herniated, and a piece had broken off and was pressing really hard on the nerve that goes to my right leg, and hence really bad nerve pain, couldn't stand upright. And to save you the gory details, ended up being able to get in for surgery in, let's see, late March of 2025. But the weeks leading up to that, it was like I really couldn't walk more than a minute or two at a time. And when I was walking, it was like I was bent over at a 30-degree angle, and like it was not good. And I'm grateful for the surgery because I feel good now. But yeah, it was a very kind of slow, insidious progression that got really bad really fast. So had the surgery and still a long progression back from that. But all that to say, I'm very grateful that I did go that direction.
So when you decided to have the surgery, did you like when you got to that point, it was like the only option that because you had waited that whole year, you had done all the PT, you had done all the different things, and and like you said, without being able to walk more than a couple minutes at a time, I'm sure that you were just like, okay, could you just take us back to the feelings of deciding about surgery? Just for anyone out there who's listening, who's mulling it back and forth, and okay, like how did you wrap your mind around the fact that you're going to do the surgery and know that you have a rehab path after that?
Yeah. So I think in that year plus, maybe I would say probably about a full year, and when I was trying to manage it with just PT, I was very averse to the idea of surgery just because I think like a lot of athletes, I'm very stubborn, and I was like, I'm just going to do the work to make it get better. Yep. If I work hard enough, it will get better. And that was my mindset going into the PT, and I was very regimented about it. I was very on top of it and just was like, I will get better on my own. Because I think the idea of any sort of surgery or cutting, especially around your spine, at least to me, was like, what if they make a mistake? What if something happens? What if I don't recover? And even though this type of surgery is fairly routine, there was still a chance it might not actually help. It might not improve you very much. So then you go through all of this rigmarole and you're left with the same thing. So I think when I was getting to the point of having to really make a decision, I think it came down to I'm not even participating in my sport anymore. I was like, that was phase one. And I'm like, okay, this is not getting better. I am not progressing forward, and I'm continuing to get worse. And I think for me, what really put the nail in the coffin for surgery was when it was bad, but it wasn't, like I say, bad. It was bad, but it wasn't really bad until I would say mid-January of 2025. So about 2.5 months out from my surgery. And that was the point where it was actually like a week before the team was supposed to leave for training trip. I just had a practice, and I was on the erg still at this point, and I was like, okay, I'm trying this workout. I'm going to do it. And I got done with the workout, and I'm like, something's wrong. This really hurts. I don't know what's wrong. And then just over those few days, it really degraded. And I was talking to my coach, and we're like, we can't have you go on a training trip if you can't even move. Yeah. And I think that was the point where I was like, okay, I need to do something about this, or I'm just going to continue to get worse. And I think seeing it get to the point where I couldn't get in bed without assistance, I couldn't stand upright, I couldn't walk really without a lot of assistance. It's like, this is to the point where it's affecting my ability just to function as a person, let alone a high-level athlete. So yeah. I think for me, it kind of just became my only option at that point. But I think it just kind of pushed me to that point where it's like, you don't have a choice. This is your only choice is to take a chance, even if there's a risk.
Yeah. And take us through How long were you in the hospital? Right
Mhm.
after surgery, were you home alone or did you have assistance? Like, how did you manage the whole surgical process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had a microdiscectomy, which is the surgery itself is very quick. I think it's like a couple hour procedure. So you're in, it takes a few hours to get everything set up. And then I think the surgery itself was, they said it was 2 hours roughly. And I was in the hospital just for the day. So I didn't have to stay overnight or anything. I was out the same day. And I think after the surgery, I wasn't allowed to drive. I was on a lot of pain medications and I couldn't. They wanted me to be very careful with how I was sitting and my posture. I'm very grateful that I have my partner, Anthony, who was there with me the whole time, was able to provide a lot of assistance with my mobility for the first week or so. And I think just given my situation with how much pain and how bad it was leading up to the surgery, the immediately after the surgery, like when the pain meds had worn off, I was like, oh, wow, like, is this what this is supposed to feel like? This is crazy. And this is cool. There was the pain on the surgical side, there was discomfort, but just comparing that to what I was experiencing before, like I stood upright for the first time in months and I was like, wow, this doesn't hurt. So even though I had to be careful with my mobility, I had to wear a brace, I had to be very careful how I turned my body, how I bent over, if at all. But I think honestly, like just the weeks after, like being careful, I was like, this is easy. This is great. I can do this because the weeks prior were so hard.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So how many weeks would you say it was that how long did you have to wear the brace? Did you have
Yeah.
to use like a cane or a walker, anything like that for how long? Just so people can get an idea of the pathway through this.
Yeah, so I didn't have to use a cane or a walker or anything like that. Thankfully, I think some people do every now and then, but for me, I wore this brace and had an ice pack that was just held on the incision site. I would say I had that for like maybe the first 3 to 5 days. And the brace, they say, is normally just a reminder not to do anything sudden with your movements. It doesn't actually do anything support wise. So I had that. And then with the surgical site, they have a big kind of gauze pad that they want you to change and keep clean for a week. So that was Anthony helped me with that because I couldn't really reach it at the time. But yeah, so the actual brace was like, I would say 5 days or so. And just in needing assistance with walking and moving, that was also, I would say, about the first 2 to 3 days. Mainly just because I think after being, in my case, being like bent over for so long, having to like straighten myself out and get comfortable with the posture, that took a little bit to re-strengthen that appropriately without putting myself in a bad position again.
And when did you start PT?
Yeah, I started PT. It was 3 weeks after the surgery. That was the earliest I was allowed to start that. Part of the reason is because they want the incision site to heal properly, knowing that when you're going into your spine, you got a lot of muscle around your spine and they got to push stuff out of the way. The surgeon advised that I don't start any like activity or any PT 3 weeks out. The first week, within the day, he was like, I want you to walk just like 10 minutes, do something so you're not just sitting. And I think the only activity I could do for the first 3 weeks was just walk and build it up from you guys started with 10 minutes on the first day until an hour or so, just because we're athletes. We're like, oh, if it's not an hour, it's not a workout. And like, granted, it's a workout at that point. But I just like for my mentality, being able to get up in the morning and go out and be like, okay, I'm doing my like 25-minute neighborhood walk today. Like that was enough for me to feel like I was like progressing.
And then from there, you start PT and start moving and doing some different movements and such. How long did it take to go from PT to actually getting on the erg? Like, how long did it take on that point?
Yeah, so the erg took a little while. I was able to get on the bike sooner after about a month. I would say, yeah, I think I started PT, did that for a week, and then after moving, getting that motion back, I was able to jump on the bike. And I was on the bike, only on the bike, probably for, let's see, 10 weeks. So they didn't want me to get back on the erg until that incision was almost completely healed, which takes about that length of time. And I think when I was on the bike, I had to start with 30 minutes. And then if that went well, you could do 30 minutes again.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like 35 minutes. So it's a very slow progression. I think it took me probably 2 months to get back up to an hour on the bus.
Wow.
So we're looking at probably 3 months out before I was at 90 minutes of just steady.
Wow. Wow. And that's good to know. I always feel like when I talk to people about injuries and letting other people know what that, like, because it does feel like a lot of time that you have to spend to get your body used to. And you have to, and with a surgery, you have to wait for incisional healing and you have to wait for the doctors to feel comfortable to clear you. And so there's a lot of different things that kind of come into that. So so you said 2 to 3 months out, you're on the bike.
In 10 weeks I was on the erg. Yep. Starting on the erg.
Starting on the erg. So, okay. So, yeah. So just 2 months. And then you were on the erg. And then, okay. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just was going to say, and back with it's the same thing with the bike progression on the erg. I also started, you get 2 by 5 minutes. Yep. Very tiny little chunks. So same, very slow progression up as well.
How long did it take you to go to do the return to row, starting with those 2 5-minute chunks? Like, how long did it take you to get to, do you remember how long it took you to get to 30 minutes?
30 minutes on the erg. I think that took, I remember doing 2 by 5 and then doing 2 by 7 and then a 10-minute in the 5. It was just such tiny little pieces. I think it probably took me maybe 3 weeks to get to 30 minutes. Like 30 minutes, and still that was broken up 2 by 15, but it took a little bit to get that. Because I think on the erg, at least with the PTs that I was using, they advised me to go every other day. They didn't want me to add every day.
Yeah.
And so there were days where I was like, okay, this feels like a lot right now. Even though it's just 10 minutes, we're just going to do 10 minutes again tomorrow. Or excuse me, in 2 days.
And you probably had to do a lot of checking in with yourself and just being like, how do I feel? Like, how does this feel? Did you have any apprehension at all as you were doing this? Would your back talk to you? And like, how did you handle those little hiccups where your injury decides to say something while you're trying to get back to work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think in the early days when I was progressing back to just really any sort of volume of steady state, I actually felt really good just because there wasn't a lot of load on my body and I was just building back very slowly. I think when I was seeing some of the hiccups or the setbacks came when I was at I wouldn't even say full, but when I was trying to progress back to intensity and get back to like 1 row and 1 erg a day versus 1 row and 1 bike, or progressing back to higher volume, higher intensity, and getting over, okay, we've gotten to steady state. We can do steady state. Great. Now let's get you back on the water. Okay, now we have to balance. Okay, let's progress this back, making sure we're being careful with the balance. And I think when I first got back on the water, that took a little bit getting used to because your hips are moving, your spine's moving a lot more. Yeah, and I had a few setbacks, I think, in the building to intensity phase of that.
And when you got back on the water, were you in the single or? Okay.
Yep, mostly the single. We do row team boats as well, like doubles and quads. But given where I was in my progression, I couldn't do full practice in the team boat. So it was mostly just me and the single building back volume at that point.
It's great to have as an option because there are a lot of people who may be listening, you're on a team and there's always that if you're in the 8 and you have to be 100%, like you have to be able to go out and go back and not be the person who raises their hand and says, hey, coach, you got to take me out. I think that's something that a lot of athletes deal with in our sport because you don't want to be that person who then makes it a 7 on the way back or someone else has to sit out. If there isn't somebody else who's coming back from an injury too that you can piggyback off of. It was good that you'd be able to get out in the single. Did you have anybody during your rehab journey who was like your rehab buddy? Was there somebody that kind of kept you going?
Yeah, so I think we joke with it, but I think in the very early days, it was just me, but I think that was actually appropriate because I was moving so slowly that I needed that time. But as I was transitioning more volume from the bike erg to the water, Sab was actually also had her rib injury around that same time when I was still recovering. And I was like, hey, you want to rip 2 by 12K every single week on the berg when it's 90 degrees in the boathouse by ourselves while everyone else is rowing? Great. And so having her as well as another guy who's one of our good friends, he works at the boathouse, he would just jump on and train with us too. So I think having those 2 individuals for really 2 or 3 months there where we were both transitioning back to the water made it really fun just to be like, hey, I know I have a little mini team that I get to train with today. because I've been alone on the berg, and I did that for almost a year before my surgery, and it's doable, but it's really hard. So I think having those touch points is really powerful with your team.
Yeah. Yeah. It helps when you have somebody else that you can bounce ideas off of or just feel like you're still in it. Because I feel like, especially with rowing, you can get pulled out and be so by yourself that it just makes it really hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And did you have any books or podcasts or anything in particular that kind of either passed the time or helped you through your journey?
Yeah, I think this is probably really dumb, but we both, so Sav, Donnie is the guy I just mentioned, Sav and myself, we all have similar taste in music. I call it divorced dad rock, country rock, like those kind of songs. And there's a time and a place for it, right? I can't do it every day, but like we do our really hard pieces. It was always just the same energy and this same chaotic, but really fun energy that, hey, we're going to show up and we're going to do some really hard work, but it's going to be really fun. And so now whenever I hear those songs come on now in our practice, I'm like, oh, like, yeah, I can do this. It's just like a little trigger now in my brain. So I think that was helpful. And I think I actually, soon after my surgery, just because I had a lot of time on my hands, I wasn't training for 4 hours a day. I got a Kindle and I love to read. I've always loved to read. But I think having my Kindle and having it on the berg with me is a new discovery that I've really enjoyed to pass the time by myself.
Yeah, I know. Because once you're on the berg, it's like, I always think to myself, maybe I need to get a desk or something that I can just laptop up.
Yes.
Dude, you would think there would be like a concept too, if you're listening, there needs to be some type of attachment that you can put on there so you can do, I don't know. I'd love to have my laptop. And then you could just be steady stating it out and getting things done at the same time. But the Kindle's a great idea. I've never propped it up on there.
It's lovely. I recommend. You can lose 90 minutes to 2 hours really fast.
Oh my gosh, that's very speaking my language, because I'm not a fan of the berg, but I'll do it. But it's just, spending all that time just making the wheels spin. Yeah.
Yes. And something I feel like, and Sav and I have talked about this, there's something a little bit psychotic about it. You get a little bit psychotic, I think, when you're just like, all right, time to lock in. Let's go. And it's different than the erg, like pushing hard on a berg. Like, you can't think about your swing or your rhythm or like, I think on the erg, there's always so much to think about. In my opinion, I'm always thinking about technically something, whereas on the berg, you're just like, I'm stomping on these pedals. And that's it. But it's just a different kind of, I think, mental training that I also learned to really appreciate. So I also didn't used to like the berg, but now I'm like, it's my buddy. I'll see him next time.
Next time. Tell us what you're doing now. So how long ago was the surgery in comparison to now? So you're talking 2024. So we're far out. 25. Oh. Okay. So how are you feeling now? What are you training for? What's next?
Yes. So surgery was a little over a year out now, actually. Yeah, we're looking at the end of last March. And so by the time I was I say this with air quotes here. I don't know if it's right. Voice podcast, using heavy air quotes here. I was at quote full volume last fall, but I think I had touched 2K pace one time before fall speed order, which in hindsight probably wasn't very smart, but I was so excited just to go down the course again, even though it was not my best work, that I just wanted to do it and kind of gain the trust of my body back that, look, I can do this and it's okay. So I think in terms of what it looks like now is through the fall, there were a couple hiccups, like a little bit in and out, having to step back and come forward again. But this January here, things have been going, I think, fairly well. I've been feeling really good. And I think because my back is in a space where it doesn't hurt to do the rowing motion, like it's amazing what you can do when you're not in pain. But we're just at a point, finally, I feel like after, I guess it's almost been over 2 years, really, of just dealing with back pain and then recovering from surgery, that I'm like finally starting to see these glimmers of speed again. And it's like they're glimmers and I got to keep stitching them together. And the goal is obviously to be consistent with those and have more and more of those moments where you're like, yeah, that was it. So I think when we're looking at what's next weekend immediately is spring speed order. So that's another, at least for me, another race post-surgery that I feel like I've had a little more time to feel myself out and like adequately prepare. And you don't know what's going to happen. Nothing's guaranteed. But I think I'm just like grateful every day that I was able to get back to it. And I want to keep seeing speed and keep seeing improvements as we look toward the summer with our additional speed order that we have here in July. Yeah, I think just looking forward to continuing to see speed improvements, continuing to see technical improvements, and just, again, yeah, grateful for the journey.
And how would you say that your warm up, your cool down, like your general, like how you piece your practices together and how you take care of yourself, how is it different from what you were doing before? Or is it different? Or you just...
No, I would say it's different. I think so. And I'm speaking for myself here. I don't know if this is true of anyone else listening, but I feel like when you're like very young, and I didn't row in high school, so I'm not sure about high school athletes, but in college, like when you're like 18, you can run in from class, like not warm up for a 2K and rip a PR.
Yeah.
Like I literally did that once. I was late from a class, missed the warm up, did 4 paddle strokes, and was like, great, we're 2K. So thinking about what I do now as a much older person, I'm just like, okay, I have to be very intentional about how I'm mobilizing, how I'm activating the right muscle groups. And then even on the water, like I'm thinking about how different muscle groups connect and making sure that when I'm making technical changes, I'm feeling it in my body in the right way.
Yeah.
Because I think the other thing too, I know I did this as a young athlete and did it for a long time, is that you can make the right shapes, but not be engaging correctly.
Mm.
And I think for me, that's what led to my injury, is that I was making technically the pretty correct shapes most of the time, but I wasn't actually engaging my core as well as I should. I wasn't engaging my glutes as well as I should. And I didn't really know how to do that until very recently. So when I'm warming up, I have the smorgasbord of exercises that I think everyone does at this point in their life in rowing. And I always wake up and do an assessment of what I'm feeling. I have the same 4 or 5 that I'll warm up with in terms of mobility and activation exercises. And then depending on, let's say my left trap and my left lat are acting up again, they're a little tight, I probably need to do some more mobility there to make sure my scapula is moving the right way. Or, okay, my right hip is a little tight, we got to work on that today with the lacrosse ball. So I think it's just making sure I'm being very intentional about it and making sure I'm staying very aware. I think the other piece too that I know I've changed for myself for sure since this has happened is that I don't want to say I'm being okay with it, but being more okay and willing to say, hey, yep, this is going to get worse if I continue to do this, or this tightness, this feeling is, or like feeling an injury, something like that, kind of flare up. I'm like, you need to stop. You need to stop and you need to go bike, or you need to listen to what your body's telling you and take a step back. Because I think prior to surgery and dealing with the injury, I just was like, yep, we're just going to deal with it. We're just going to keep rowing through it. And I think that's partly why it got as bad as it did, because I was so stubborn and so insistent on, nope, I'm not missing this. I'm not missing this piece. I'm not missing this practice. And so trying to get right with myself that you don't want to pull yourself out of practice, but you do need to listen to your body. It will tell you what to do, and it tells you what it needs if you're actually listening to it.
It sounds like a big lesson, big takeaway is to be able to listen to your body and be able to then make good decisions on top of it. Because some people listen and then they just decide, like you said, you're stubborn and you just decide, hey, I'm just going to do this anyway. And are there any other lessons that you learned or unusual lessons that you learned from this that kind of surprised you?
This is maybe, it's maybe too macroscopic out of the actual sport lesson, right? But we take mobility for granted. And that is something I'd never thought I would hear my 30-year-old self say. But I think this experience and having a while where it was painful, but a few months in particular where I really couldn't move very well on my own, like walking and whatnot, like we really take that for granted, like having bodies that can do just the daily functions of life, but being able to push ourselves this hard in our sport and perform at this level, it's really rare. And we're really lucky that we can do this. And I think that really was eye-opening for me, like, holy crap, having a healthy body is something to be grateful for. I think the other piece too, just again, because I was leading up to surgery, I wasn't able to go on this training trip. For the last year, I was missing a lot of practice. So I think, sorry, I'm stuttering. I think like maybe, there could be a part of myself who felt very disconnected from the team, and you get a little bit of FOMO because I'm like, oh, I'm not at practice. I'm not making the same gains they are. I'm falling behind. I definitely did feel that. I think that the year of 2024, when I was dealing with this, it's the year of 2024. And I look back at that and I'm like, wow, like I missed like that whole year. And I think there are parts of me that is sad about that. And I look back on that and I'm like, wow, now I'm a year and a half behind. Or, okay, great. Now I have a year and a half to make up. And I do have those thoughts every now and then. But I think for me, I always tried to reframe it as what can I learn or what can I do today? And even if it was my 20-minute walk and that was all I got, great. I remember walking in on one of my first days, like, oh, I can berg for 30 minutes. Amazing.
Mhm.
And trying to find those little glimmers like that, or trying to find little moments of connection with my team.
Yeah.
Which for me was often just the warm up because we all mobilized together on land and then I'd be on my berg and then they would go out and do their row. And just having those like 20 minutes like with my team, I'm like, oh, that was great. And again, something that I know I took for granted, like when I wasn't able to go at all, I was like, wow, just having 5 minutes with my friends and my teammates makes my day. So I think that was a big recognition too. And just the power of reframe and how powerful that can be with trying to find glimmers versus finding reasons to be angry and sad, which are both very valid. And I still feel those things, but both can be true.
Yeah. And as you're training now and you're working towards new goals, how have your goals, like when you set your goals, is there a little bit of a change in how you're talking about reframing and shaping things and also listening to your body? Do you give yourself more grace? Are your goals more spacious in the idea that they're not going to be so hard set that you can't take a step back? I'm just interested in like how you pick an aggressive goal because you're training for the elite teams, and how do you make goals that you can still attain, but also give you space to give yourself grace?
It's a really good question. And when I figure it out, I will let you know. No, I say that tongue in cheek, but I so struggle with that so much because I think we talked about finding glimmers, and I think I've gotten better at that. Like just saying, okay, great. I made it through a week of practice without my back blowing up. Great. And I'm giggling as I say that, but I also I struggle a lot with myself. I'm feeling a lot of shame or feeling like I'm behind, feeling like I'm not fast enough because I feel like I had this blip in my life where for essentially 2 years, I wasn't able to do the normal training plan. And so I think maybe a lot of people would quit. Maybe a lot of people would be like, yep, I'm done with this. But I feel like for me, if I'm just continuing to progress and just see these little instances of hope, I'm like, there's a chance. And I think for me, being able to set goals of like execution-based goals of, okay, I did this broken 2K and I was able to, for 1,250 meters, I held the race rhythm and the race speed that I wanted to hold, that I know I'm capable of in the right way. Or like I held this technical change, or I held this catch length for a certain time period. I held my body position the right way. Like I'm gonna get a video and I'm like, great, I didn't think I was doing that, but we did it. So I'm really long-winded way to answer your question, but I think setting very small but objective goals is helpful because it's easy to get sucked into the chatter that goes with the big picture because I want to make an Olympic team, right? That's, I think, the goal that all the high performance people are going for. And I think with that, and like in any sport at this level, it's just there's constantly like, what's this person doing? What's this team doing? What are you doing? Oh, you're doing this? I'm doing this. And I think since this whole experience has allowed me to take the focus away from trying to figure out what everyone else is doing and just focus on myself. And I think to your point, giving myself permission to do what my body needs. So giving myself the grace to be like, make adjustments, make changes as needed, but also build back and reestablish trust in my body. Because I feel like with this injury, when I was still rowing before surgery, there were a lot of days where I was like, I don't know if I can do this practice. I don't know if I can finish this. I don't think I can do this. And so reestablishing that trust with myself that like, hey, I am well enough to do this, or I am well enough to do this at a high level. I'm well enough to do this at a really high level and I'm keeping up with XXX person. So I think taking those little steps of finding confidence at a baseline and then just seeing little increases in speed is what's been really, I think, most helpful for me.
And so have you guys you've gotten back out on the water? You're out in Saratoga. So I know your water's a little bit better than ours. Our flow rate is so high right now.
Oh,
still.
no.
Yeah. So the river is really moving. But you guys have been out. Have you, right now, for everybody listening, this is April 24th. So how long have you guys been out on the water? How do you feel like the water training's going? You said you have speed order coming up. How are you feeling about heading into that?
Yeah, so we've been out on the water here for probably a month. We were fortunate enough to be able to head down south to Florida for a few weeks earlier this year. And by the time we got back, we had timed it almost perfectly with the thaw here back home, where we were able to row out of a different part of our lake, a different boathouse up the creek that was thawed. And then when our portion thawed, we moved back home. So we got to stay home, but like make use of the other facilities where the water was a bit better. And I think in a nutshell, I think training has been going well. I think as with anything, there's always hiccups and bumps. And I think the chalk that we deal with, I think in the spring is always, it's always a treat, but I think it's just, you gotta laugh at it. You can't take yourself that seriously. Just got to embrace the chaos. And with my back in particular, there's a little bit of sensitivity to really jerky, acute motions. Like the chop itself is fine, but like when things twist the wrong way or things like that, I have to be a little bit careful. But yeah, I think it's been going well. And I think looking at speed order here next week, I'm trying to approach it with a mentality of cautious optimism. And I say that because I feel like last fall, when it had been, I don't know, a year and a half since I had raced, definitely over a year since I had touched any sort of 2K speed, I went into that being like, yeah, I guess here we go. I'm like, yeah, I think that showed in the results because they weren't good. And I think going into it, I want to, again, just establish a good rhythm and just trust my body. And so I'm not expecting anything amazing for myself. But I am I am hoping that I think I can have a race and execute it in a way that I know I gave everything I had and I know I executed it very well from a technical perspective. I think something I know I've been working on a lot of the last month, just building up to race day, finally being in a training block where I'm like, okay, I'm touching 2K speed and I'm sustaining it. My back can handle it. You know, I've been working a lot on rhythm and just what that rhythm feels like in my body. So if I can have a race or a series of races this coming weekend where I feel like I can hold that and sustain it, that will be a good step for me.
And I just wanted to ask for anyone who's listening, how do you balance adulting with high performance training? Great question. Can imagine.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'm also still figuring it out. So if anyone has any advice, hit me up. So for some background on myself, so I mentioned I went to grad school. I got my MBA. And following grad school, I got a job remotely, thankfully, for a big med device company called Med. And so I've been working there now for about 3 years, about, I guess, 4 if you count the internship. But I think for me, what I've learned, at least being in what is technically a full-time role and then training full-time, is that your boundaries are only as good as the ones that you set. No one else is going to set those boundaries for you. And I think the second thing is that as a high performance athlete, the level of work ethic and the level of intentionality that we operate in, that's really special. And it's not common. And I say that, and I think a lot of athletes, like, again, you take this for granted, this like level of intensity, the level of, hey, yeah, I'll own that and I'll help you with that. Or, hey, yeah, let's go work really hard on this. That's not normal. And so I say that because, like, when I graduated from grad school, got this job, the traits that I am being praised for and complimented by my managers on performance reviews and whatnot are the traits that I learned from the sport. Yeah. They're not what I learned in business school. I learned how to do spreadsheets. I learned accounting. I learned business strategy. I learned marketing. I learned a lot of stuff in grad school. but they don't teach you how to give a crap. Excuse my language. They don't teach you how to take ownership and take things and run with them.
Yeah.
They don't teach you how to keep going when things are really hard.
Yep.
And so I guess just message, advice, whatever you want to call it, for those that are concerned about it or are concerned about their career with rowing in college, high school, whatever level it is, you are capable of so much more than you realize because you have the skills that the sport taught you. And I believe that really strongly. And I think I've only seen it as I've progressed through my career, as I've been rowing, because I've been openly communicating that I'm rowing with my boss, with my managers. They, for the most part, have been very supportive. And I think because I have the work ethic, the ownership, the willingness to try and work, try to do hard things that we do in rowing, but doing that in work, because I have those traits, they are more willing to be accepting of this full-time training. I know it's really long-winded, but hopefully that makes sense what I'm saying. You're going to be a valued employee because you have those traits. And I think once you can prove yourself in the work environment that you are going to be this good, was probably going to be a good employee, they're more willing to work with you. So yeah, all that to say, I think early on, I was very timid and I was very afraid to even bring up that I was doing this rowing thing outside of work. I didn't know how to explain it properly. People weren't really going to get it. I was worried they were going to be like, why are you slacking off? What do you mean? But the more open I've been with that communication, I think the more willing they've been to support me. And I think I've just seen it pay off in my own anxiety level. And I'm less stressed about it and I'm less worried about having to straddle these two different universes. But yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. I know it was kind of long.
No, it's the idea of being the astronaut and the lawyer.
Yeah.
Like when you're lawyering, nobody cares about the fact that you were up in space. And when you're in space, nobody cares about the depositions you were writing as a lawyer. It's two very large jobs to be an elite athlete and then also like a full-time person at a job. It's just a lot. And to be able to do that, I commend you because you are working very sure of that.
Again, just grateful. I'm just, again, very grateful for the people around me, both in rowing and also in my job. But I think just keep communicating, over communicate to the point of it being annoying. Just tell them what you're doing because I'm like, oh yeah, I don't care. I feel like people, like, at least in the corporate space that I work in, they just want to know if you're going to be offline. They're like, yeah, that's fine. Great. As long as you're getting your work done, I don't care. Whereas if you don't say anything and then it comes up, like, oh, why were you gone? And why didn't you come to this meeting? Like, just get ahead of it. And I think being willing to be open about it has helped me immensely.
What are your closing thoughts? So if someone is listening to this podcast and they're having back pain and it's getting to the point where their docs are worried about them, what would you want to say to that person and how would you want to encourage them or what advice would you give them?
Yeah. I think the first thing is that know that the doctors and your PTs and your coaches, like the folks who might be encouraging you to get surgery or get additional help in some way, like they are only wanting the best for you and they want the best for the longevity of your body as well. I think I would say do your research. I'm someone like I need to know why things are happening or like cannot proceed. I need to understand the why. I need to know all of the reasons as to why they need to do XYZ manipulation, this exercise, this surgical procedure, whatever. So I think don't be afraid to ask questions is the big one. And then I think when it comes to a big decision like having surgery, I think know that a lot of physicians out there who do specifically this type of back surgery, it's all they do. So they're very good at it. Yep. And so I think if you can go into a big decision like that with having done all of your due diligence, so you have all of the information that you could need, you're not afraid to ask questions, I think there's comfort in knowing that you've explored all your options and you can make a decision that you know is right for you or what maybe the doctor says is right for you, but it's also right for you, both for the health of your body and the sport, but in the health of your body in the long run. Because I think that was part of my decision too, is like, I could keep trying to manage this with PT, but you're not going to row because you can't move. And you also might forever have issues with your gait because you're ruining the nerve in your leg. So I think for me, it was more of I want to get healthy now and I'm sick of this. So I think just don't be afraid to take the leap and just keep asking questions.
Lauren, thank you so much for talking to me today. I think we went over so many great things that people will really be interested in, especially if they're dealing with some back pain. in relationship to their rowing. So I think this is really helpful. And thank you so much for sharing your story. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great.